Principle of innovation, which is radical change and radical transformation and radically different direction, may be applied to what we were used to in how we are going to do things in the future. In a very here and now perspective, we have a number of speakers who, from an international perspective, they run businesses that very much international in scope and therefore have a lot of information to share with us from their international experiences in countries other than Australia. And we'll zoom in on a few issues that relate to innovation in sport, and many of those will directly relate to our previous session where we talk about running sport and governing sport, managing sport, with some side steps to maybe technological innovation that then sparks the importance to radically change our attitude towards those innovations. Anyway, this sounds all a bit mystical, but all will be revealed in this next session, in which we have Chris Nash, who is from Sportscover, Andrew Walton, who's from Interact Sports, and Graham Hennell, who's from Kudos. And they, again, will speak briefly, and then we will start the conversation and, much like the previous session, engage you at a certain point in time in the discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to handball first to Chris.
Thank you.
And take it from there.
Thank you very much, Hans, and thank you for the opportunity to have a chat today. Just quickly, Sportscover are an insurance provider doing sports, predominantly amateur sports, but a little bit of professional stuff all over the world. And some of the innovations that we have seen, we wanted to talk about today, really focused in on the risk management innovations and player welfare innovations. Mentioned in the previous session about concussion, and I thought I might pick up on that theme. It's one of the hot topics all around the world at the moment. I think most people in the room would be aware of what's happened with the NFL, the amount of money that's been involved, the concern that people have generally around player welfare and the ongoing player welfare that's coming out of the concussion issue. Some of the innovations may not seem to make sense in this area, but some of the things that I've picked up on there, some people may or may not be aware of amateur boxing. The amateur boxing world has actually removed head guards, partly to do with the whole issue around concussions and brain injury and blows to the head. For most people, that seems an unusual move. They did a lot of research, statistically have been able to analyse that with the head guards on, they lose peripheral vision, and they also give the athletes a sense of security that they don't necessarily have, and that the head guards then put them in terms of expanding the blow and making it a greater contact area, so on and so forth. So that was probably the first one, which then led into, in January, I'm sure the rugby guys would be aware of Saracens over in the UK using the X patch, where they've put some sensors on the heads of their players for both playing and training, and they're now trying to measure the statistical information around the impact to the head and where that could potentially lead. I guess that sort of followed on then. The RFU out of the UK have just released an online training course in the concussion area, which is very much aimed at the amateurs and how they are able to deal with concussion, making sure that people are getting the right sort of treatment. So that's been aimed very much at players, coaches and officials, and they've set up a couple of modules now online that they're asking people to go through. And then also, some people may be aware of the HeadSmart program that's being run here in Australia. HeadSmart is really about getting the education and then using a range of tools to judge the concussion. So that seems to be a major innovation that's taking place across the world, and we're getting step change in the way that we're dealing with head injuries. I was actually reading in the Touchline just during the break there, the Saracens article, and it appears that Saracens have really bought into that concept. I think there's a statement in there that their CEO says that he doesn't want to meet their players in 20 years' time and they don't know who he is, which is a major issue. One of the other innovations that I've seen then along those lines is a pilot program that's happening in Melbourne in this upcoming winter sports season on the amateur side with a high-profile amateur organisation where they have now appointed to clubs a risk management officer, and this risk management officer is going to be part of the committee. It will be an official position with a job title, and then they're going to be responsible for a lot of things that happen with regards to the running of the sport on a day-to-day basis, either training or playing, and then making sure that that has the flow-on effect to player welfare. Along those lines, some people in the room may be aware of the chaplaincy program that has started to kick off around Australia. So the chaplaincy program is basically a chaplain being assigned to an individual club, giving the members of the club access to the chaplain, no particular religion associated, but that they would then be able to use that with an understanding that the club is quite often the place where people draw their strength and where they feel that they can get the support and what they need. And that was a really interesting one on the player welfare side. We've seen it being used currently on everything from issues directly related to the club as well as issues just related to the individual. So we could be talking about, the death of a member during a game, all the way through to maybe addictions and other things that individual members are dealing with. So I think those sort of innovations are changing the face of what we're seeing and the relationship, that we were talking about earlier with sports.
Okay. Thank you. I guess a good example of a theme that is high profile, player welfare, and different conceptions of what player welfare means, and then the different ways of how sport responds to improving or delivering on the responsibility for player welfare.
Absolutely,
so
yes.
A good start to the session. Now let's move to Graham Hennell from Kudos and I guess explore innovation from a slightly different angle.
Okay, thanks Hans. I'd just like to share with you, for about the last 6 months, we've been talking to sports clubs and organisations mainly across Australia and the US and the UK, and really just getting their feedback on the use of social media. Now, social media is not new, and I think everybody in the room probably uses it, but what we've been finding, the big reach out for us is that the issue people are having is actually the management of social media, whether at a player level, a club level or organisation level. So really what we've been told, getting the feedback, is there's probably 3 main areas that people are looking at that they wish to manage better. The first area, which is fairly obvious, is inappropriate messaging. Now, the outgoing messages, I don't think we have to go into that. I think we all know about what happens if you have an inappropriate outgoing message. But what the feedback we've been getting, it's actually a bigger problem for the clubs with the incoming messages, because what's happening is that, for example, one of the national coaches in a team in Australia, his major concern is that his players get bullied through social media with incoming messages. And what that can do is actually affect their performance on the field. So that was his major issue there. So it's really how they can manage that. The second area which people have been sharing with us is actually how to educate people in the use of social media, because everybody's agreed it's going to be around for a long time. What form it takes, what it evolves to, it's going to be around. So what's been interesting is it's the education, especially clubs in the US have been sharing with us. What they're planning to do is put it into their academies, so that when they're all signing up their people for the academies, probably age 14, 13, they bring them in, they teach them about the sports skills, they teach them about health and diet, they teach them about media, dress, presentation. Now they're all looking at putting in a social media education program, so that when these guys finally get out of the academy, they'll be able to manage that social media in the appropriate way. And I think the last area that really people are sharing with us, what they want to do is actually work out how to use social media in a better way to get value out of it. Now, this can either be brand value for the club, or actually things like better value for integrating members into the club. This area is still fairly uncharted waters for them. The main area they're really looking at is the brand value, because of course if they can get brand value through the players, the club and the sponsors, that's all going to equate to better value for the club and organisation, which obviously everybody survives on sponsorship. So over this time we've been sharing this, and what's been quite interesting is that nobody really has an answer, and over the 6 months, to be honest, we haven't found an answer at all. It's just really about the management. So what we've been, I suppose, pushed is to facilitate across the globe groups of user groups where people can get together and share these experiences. And as this evolves, we're finding that people are going to be quite open, across all sports, across organisation and countries. So what we're doing now in an informal way is just setting up user groups across these organisations who wants to get involved and share with the experiences of what they're doing, what they're learning, and bring it to each other. So if anybody wants in the room wants to participate, we would welcome you, invite you to participate.
Okay, so from player welfare and the issues surrounding player welfare to transferring some of that player welfare in context of social media and how this impacts the broader environment of the club, and I guess the extended reach that social media can have. We're not capitalizing on that yet, and how we can better do that. And handing over to Andrew to take us through some past and future scenarios.
Thanks Hans. Thanks for having me here. And my, I suppose, key points I'm going to take you through revolve around more the community aspect of sport, and just to sort of form a connection amongst us here. I'm a father. I have 4 sons from 2 different mothers at 2 different times. I coach a women's cricket team at Premier level. Some of my players call me a girly man. Arya Stark and her sword needle, they're my favourite Game of Thrones characters. And finally, as a fan, when Dustin Martin gets the ball in near the 50 or Glenn Maxwell's batting, my excitement levels certainly rise. The 3 areas here, governance, social and personalised, are aspects that have relevance to community responsibility with an agility to be innovative based around community sport. Firstly, a few numbers that relate to a presentation that Simon Hollingsworth gave last year about the composition of boards based upon a recent survey of 47 NSOs. And it just highlighted the needs for technology in their strategic plans, having the expertise within a board and how that can be structured. And boards are not just purely people who have got skills in accounting, finance, legal, etc. They also need to be consider the leadership on how to engage and encourage the digital native to contribute to that. And a few examples I'm going to give in the social media space. My Cricket has built a community Facebook platform in the last season and a half, and it's now grown to over 217,000 likes. So it's becoming a fairly impressive sort of scale. But what's interesting is the increase in acceptance and interest of community stories that are shared amongst the sport, how we can improve the understanding. And I'll give 2 examples here of the growth in a short period of time. The slide on screen, in January 2014, there was a call out to find who's the oldest player still playing cricket in Australia. And we found Lingard Golding from Goodwood in the 3rd grade. And Lingard was coming back from an injury, he hurt his shoulder, he still felt he was good enough to compete. He'd made 100 a couple of years ago, click, there's a scorecard, validated it. Last year, in last year's cricket season, this was the highest ranking post, a reach of over 120,000 people, likes and shares of over 4,000, 18,000 post clicks. Pretty impressive in a community platform. Where this has grown to this year, November 2014, this current season, over 4 posts on the My Cricket platform have achieved over 500,000 reach. This partnership between the father and son, 168 runs to the last wicket, a hero moment in sport, where David, the father, made 123 not out. His son Joe made 36, his highest ever score, had a reach of 961,000, 15,000 likes, 136,000 post clicks. That is serious engagement in the social space. I love showing that video because it brings a whole lot of things together. Community sport, Jess Cameron, who plays for the Southern Stars, plays for the Vic Spirit. The Sunday afternoon game, but the video taken by a fellow called Michael Costello, and this is where it gets interesting to me, is that Michael takes video for the game for this club. He's a volunteer. He doesn't get paid for the job, he's just a volunteer. So Michael's taken the video, he's posted it online. Vidibus is his Twitter handle. He's tagged in Jess's 6 to Cricket Australia, to Interact Sport, who provide My Cricket, and we get 66,000 views, 47,000 views, so it became a fairly popular video at that point in time. But the interesting thing in the club space is the backstory. Michael Costello has Asperger's syndrome. It's a challenge for Michael to be involved in a club, as we would possibly expect, but he's able to work within his disability and be comfortable in that space to contribute to the fabric of that club. And also aligned, a separate sort of story, but Carl Heiser, who's the second grade scorer for this club, who this season scored his 400th game, which is a significant achievement. Carl was born with polio, has to walk with a walking stick, has to be driven to games. But they use social media to find their way to contribute to the sport. The last area is what I call the personalised experience. So this is where we're shifting now, whether a player, an official, a volunteer or a fan, due to the avalanche of options available to us to engage, the expectation now is for innovation to deliver a personal experience, to understand where you fit within the sport, where your touch point is, to connect with you whether you have a management role or you're trying to consume information. That's the next phase that we see coming through. Thanks, Hans.
Okay, thank you. All right, a wonderful array of, I guess, issues and also examples, maybe even solutions to things that are happening in sport, issues that are happening in sport, and how you can respond to it or why you should respond to it. Now, maybe the first question to the panel, we hosted an industry forum the other week, and one of the members, who was a director of a state sporting institute, when asked the question, you know, what could universities, what could research institutes do for you? And her response was, what's going to be the next biggest thing in high performance sport? So if you ask 10 people randomly when they think about innovation in sport, 7 out of 10 will think about how to improve high performance sport. But the things that you've outlined are all outside that sphere. They're in the 30% of non-high performance. So if I would ask you the same question, what should we be aware of in sport governance land, sport management land? Are the issues outside high performance sport? What would be your view? You know, what are the issues we need to keep in the back of our mind?
I think aligned in every area is to accept and understand the data and information available, whether it comes from a performance issue or it comes from a behavioural or communication issue. Accept and understand.
So data in its complexity or in its mass, or?
That's probably the challenge, Hans, is finding a way to have it presented to the various levels of boards or subcommittees that it can be not only understood but actioned upon. I think we've already seen a lead from the previous panel about the importance of planning, and your planning is only going to be as good, and I'll probably defer to you, Chris, here, your planning is only as good as your data that's available to you.
Yep. Absolutely. I totally agree with that, and I guess alongside that, sitting similar to the previous discussion about governance and structures, you know, we've seen certainly our experiences wherever an Olympics turns up to a Western world country, that the amateur sport base becomes a lot more professional in the lead up, and then afterwards in terms of the way they organise themselves. Sydney was a fantastic example of that here. London continued that on. Athens I can't really comment on, although I have a Greek Cypriot wife, so maybe I should comment on it. But the continuation of that that structure around, you know, what should be involved at a club, what is the club's moral responsibility, what is the responsibility of administrators to supply to members, how far do you go, where's the line, you know, do you open the door for people, do you walk them through the door and out the back, you know, how far does it press? And I think that's what we're seeing now, also with a change in society, and I think all the three presentations here have talked about the individualisation of the sport experience. So I think from an administration point of view, that is also going to change what we do at a club level as well.
Yeah. Great.
Well, I think if we're talking about individualisation and personalisation, I think even Steve, in a comment in the last session, touched on it. The biggest challenge is going to be for the clubs and the organisations to keep contact with the support membership supporter base. You know, as you move along, you know, as people become more professional, and there's all the other challenges within sport, you know, drugs, performance, behaviour. It's how they're going to keep connected to this, to the base. It's going to keep the businesses, the clubs going.
Keep connected. Yeah. So maybe to take this approach one step further, if the next big thing in order to leap ahead of competition, innovation is all about leaping ahead of competition rather than me too behavior. You want to do something unique and new, and so in high performance sport that's clear. You know, you just want to, you know, the America's Cup. When Australia won, it was all about thinking 20 years ahead. What would we do 20 years ahead in order to win this particular event? If we cast our eye 20 years ahead now and say, what would you gamble on from where you sit in your businesses? So outside that 70% of high performance and inside that 30% of organizational innovation, where can organizations leap ahead from your expertise and your insight into the business in 20 years?
Yep. I would say from my experience, you know, similar to what these guys are talking about, the connection is definitely one of the issues, and certainly an opportunity for everybody to jump ahead. I think I read a little piece in the Sports Commission pamphlet that they put out there. They talked about netball as a case study. And similar to what Andrew was just talking about with my cricket, they created my netball, and you know, that had a profound effect on the way that they were running and organising the sport. So I think that it's those sort of things. But my gut feel is also other social interactions like the drugs in sport issue. And for those who may have heard a bit about the debate on ice and what's going on just recently, some interesting things happening in Melbourne yesterday on the whole ice debate. And, you know, are we now getting to a point where we've got to make a decision around amateur sport? You know, how far is competitiveness able to take us? You know, are we comfortable that, say, concussions are something that it's just part of the game and you get on with it? Or are we now looking ahead and saying, okay, if you guys think that taking some form of performance enhancing drugs is appropriate at an amateur level, that's not really why you should be playing the sport. Have we gone results crazy on that level? Or do we need to stay that way? You know, I don't know the answer to that question.
Before I throw to one of the other panel members, maybe a quick question for you to ponder, and then that will be the final part of this session. from where you sit in your business, thinking 20 years ahead, something that we wouldn't consider now, like, you know, head protection or concussion protection 20 years ago wasn't an issue.
No.
You know, you wouldn't think about it, and you would not prepare for it or innovate towards it because it wasn't an issue. Can you think from your business 20 years ahead about something that may not be considered an issue today, but from your knowledge where you sit will be an issue in 20 years? And then, you know, quick straw poll, if we can, to conclude this session, to get some insights from you. And I'll throw back to one of the gents here to talk about their views. Yeah.
Wow, 20 years is a long time. I think we're having enough problem thinking in the next 12 months what's going to happen. But, you know, I think, well, if you think back, mobile phones only arrived here about 25 years ago. But I think it's really, the biggest challenge is just going to be keep an open mind and keep up with things as they evolve. So I think it's more keeping up and having an open mind to challenges as they come, rather than actually being closed and saying, well, look, these things are new, just we'll just leave them there.
So stay slightly ahead of the issue and try to come up with...
Well, keep addressing challenges as they come up.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, look, I think within sport there are so many good stories that can be told that can influence society in general, and community clubs have got the ability to broadcast their content, create a position for it. We had one example on the weekend where Cricket Victoria live streamed their Premier Cricket Grand Final over the 3 days, and on the Friday alone they had a unique audience across a day of 13,000 people. So a Premier Cricket match would normally get about 40 spectators at the most. 13,000 people, we heard from as far away as Singapore, Abu Dhabi, logged in and watched a Premier Cricket game that was being live streamed from the Junction Oval on a Friday afternoon. So you know, we hear about media rights at the big end of town, but please don't discount how powerful the ability that a community club can create their own position and then help educate and better inform and communicate, not just to their own players, but their broader community as well.
So basically what you're saying is 20 years ago, if you would have said a community club in local Victoria...
Who's doing the newsletter?
Yeah. Not you know, they're going to have a look at us in Singapore or Abu Dhabi. Yeah. Have you thought about the question? I only need one or two. An issue in 20 years that we wouldn't consider an issue now. What are they? This is why futurology is so hard. Well, that in itself is an answer to the question, I think. That, you know, Graham said, you know, you have to keep track of things and respond as they come. Steve too earlier said, you know, 20-year planning. Damien mentioned a 50-year plan by the Japanese Football Association, and with a target of becoming world champions, both male and female. I think is almost at the heart of this session, because if you aspire towards something like that, you will have to be ahead of the pack. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Can I just say quickly
on a final note, Chris?
Yeah, look, I think one of the big issues for everybody in the room to potentially debate, in my opinion, will be government funding in 20 years' time as well, this country and New Zealand go through different economic cycles. And I think, Hans, you were involved with the Splish study that talked a lot about what are the models that are achieving success now at the top level, but how does that government funding flow down? You know, in the UK, they've used the lottery funding to push out, and they've, you know, in a lot of Western world countries, they're working into health budgets and those sorts of things in terms of achieving the funding. But if the Chinese continue their rise and the Indians get focused on sport as something that they want to achieve in, then, you know, what then becomes acceptable to us as a result? And as a result of that, does the funding continue to come through if you're still based on a model that's based around specific results?
Yep.
You know, a question for debate.
Yeah. Great. I think that's a wonderful closing statement to this session. So please join me in thanking our panel members for this session.